Hello, everybody, and welcome to Ideally. I am your host, Alec Ogg, and this podcast is for creatives with ADHD who are ready to shake off that sense of underachievement and grow into their full potential. That's what I struggled with the most, so that's what I want to help y'all with. We're going to do this by learning more about personal development and entrepreneurship together so that you can go from saying, well, ideally I'd have that lifestyle I want, to actually living it and feeling successful about yourself. I am overjoyed to share today's interview with you because it is a masterclass on vision and money and entrepreneurship, and I wish I had heard this when I was starting out. And my guest is Kat Gordon, the creative entrepreneur who founded Muddy's Bake Shop here in Memphis, Tennessee. She is also a professional vision coach, and you're going to learn a bunch of tricks on how to write your own vision statement. But she's so transparent, and I hope you have as much fun listening to this as I had talking to her. So thank you all for being here, and enjoy episode 3 with Kat Gordon of Muddy's Bake Shop. Kat, thank you so much for joining me today on the podcast. Appreciate you being here.
I love being here. This is going to be so much fun.
So, for people who don't know anything about you, can you just tell us a little bit about who you are and how you got into baking? And baking is the greater thing?
Yeah.
Okay.
Yeah. So,
I don't want to be like reductionist with people, but then I'm like, how do I label it? So,
but like that's how people know me.
Okay, yeah.
You know, they've probably eaten my treats before. So, yeah, well, I'm Kat Gordon. I started baking, I think probably like most people do, just as a hobby. I had awesome parents who were very supportive of trial and error in the kitchen. They also both firmly believed that children should help out as soon as possible. So some of it was a little bit hobby. Some of it was, great, you're old enough to do this thing, help prepare dinner. So yeah, it really kind of started there. And I'm really grateful to them for, making sure that it was something we were all doing, all 3 of the kids, but also not something that we were taking too seriously.
Yeah.
It wasn't a huge deal if we messed up. Yeah. So just kind of went from there.
I've only recently gotten into like cooking dinner, and it's thanks to like the HelloFresh type subscription boxes. But my girlfriend and I in the pandemic were just doing those like every day, and it has become like the joy of my life. Like, look forward to it every day.
Yeah, I mean, it can be really, really fun, especially if you just let go a little bit of that perfectionist tendency.
Yeah.
Like, okay, you messed up. What does that mean? A slightly bland dinner?
Yeah.
All right. Pretty low stakes.
Exactly. And then when you make a mistake, you're like, oh, okay, that's so salty, it's inedible. We did something wrong.
That's right. Backtrack.
Yeah. I heard this guy, do you know Tim Ferriss, the author?
I mean, not personally.
Yeah.
Yeah, we're best buds.
Yeah, we both know him. But I heard him talking about, he wrote a book called The 4-Hour Chef, and he said that, like, cooking is the only thing that really uses all 5 senses at the same time.
Ooh,
I was like, I had never thought about that, but I've been enjoying cooking. So I'm glad your parents introduced you to at an early age.
Yeah, me too.
So then what happens next?
Well, next became, just the slog years of figuring oneself out.
It's the name of our memoir, The Slog Years.
The Slog Years. A journey with Kat Gordon. Yeah, and I think the main theme there was really emphasis on the figuring things out, learning how to ask better questions. I was really self-conscious always about not having my thing. Even the baking, like I enjoyed baking. That's when I kind of got started, but that still wasn't like the girl who bakes stuff.
So how old are we kind of talking in this?
Oh, the slog years lasted for a pretty good long time. So we're going to say, 11 through 26.
Okay, yeah.
And yeah, just kind of learning, thinking. I was surrounded by some really high achievers who, a couple of my friends were those people who I really admire and also don't always understand super well, who kind of like have a thing and know what their thing is. And they're just like, great, this is what I'm going to go do. And here's how I'm going to achieve this. And great, accomplished. And, I'm like, oh God, what?
So are you like
what's my thing?
26 and you still don't exactly know what you're doing?
Right. So I opened the bakery when I was 26.
Okay.
And full confession, still did not, it wasn't like, oh, good, here's my thing, I'm going to do it. It was just like, well, if the thing isn't here by now, got to do something.
Yeah.
So let's do this.
I remember when you were on one of my other clients, Candace's pod, you said something to the dent of like you become passionate about what you commit to and you're not necessarily committed to what you're passionate about? Something like that. I'm butchering it. Do you know how you said it?
Yeah, I mean, we could call this like maybe the arranged marriage philosophy. That's probably really offensive. I don't know.
No, I like that. I like that.
You know, we sort of have, I envision a lot of us with our careers and probably a lot of aspects of our lives thinking that we're just like the princess in a Disney movie. You're like, oh, one day my passion will come. My dream career, you know, the thing that I'm supposed to pursue and everything is going to click happily ever after. And it's just going to surprise me one day while I'm frolicking in the woods with talking rabbits. And, you know, maybe that is how that happens for some people, but maybe not for a lot of us. And unfortunately, I think based on just the stories that we hear, you know, I didn't have an audience of people other than, you know, a few close friends and family. But, you know, there wasn't an audience of people watching that part of the story. So it does look like, oh, this sort of overnight thing. And we see that with other people's stories all the time. And yeah, I think that can just be a little bit misleading. So instead, for me, what really worked was just saying, I'm going to take this leap. I'm going to try this thing. Maybe it's going to work. Maybe it's not. But I'm going to give it everything I've got, even if it doesn't work, because the commitment is what's really important. And yeah, for me, it was sort of like maybe working backwards into the passion that way. But just the more I commit to something, it tends to be the more I love it.
Yeah, because I think why that stood out to me is because I shared sort of that exact experience where I studied theater and then I was in Los Angeles doing songwriting and acting and things like that, and was always kind of splitting my focus between like writing, performing, playing music, singing, those types of things. And year after year, I'd be like, everybody else seems to be like building something, but mine's just like going sideways or it's flat or something. What am I doing wrong? And committing to something felt suffocating, and it felt like I was cutting off possibility. And my type of personality loves possibility. So it was hard, but I kind of had same realization you had around 26 or 27. And it was like, all right, I've narrowed down what I think I actually like and not what I thought I liked or what I should like, and sort of landed in this podcasting lane. And it was like, I'm just going to commit to it. And it's been very helpful, but I think it's a tough pill to swallow for certain personality types.
Absolutely. And it makes it really easy for us to procrastinate on things if we have this mentality of, oh, I'm sort of a multi-creative. I'm doing lots of different things. I know for me personally, that just makes it really easy to avoid the hard thing that I need to do in order to get where I really want to go. I can just say like, oh, I'm going to work on this other thing for a little bit. I'm going to kind of come over here. And I don't want this to sound like, oh, you just have to commit to one thing and never do anything else ever again. But there's that idea of at a time.
Yeah.
Maybe just one thing at a time. And it doesn't mean you can't then, once something is completed or there's a certain milestone, you know, wrap it up, do projects.
Yeah.
But yeah, trying to just sort of, oh, I'm just going to flirt with all these different projects and ideas and careers. And somehow it needs to prove itself to me within 24 hours that this is my quote unquote dream job. Well, that's unrealistic of a person.
Yeah.
Most of us are mature enough to not do that with like our dating and romantic lives, to really honestly just say, you have 24 hours. You have 1 or 2 dates to prove to me that you're the person I'm going to spend the rest of my life with. Like, oh my God, that would be so much pressure.
Yeah.
So yeah, P.S. all of your employers out there also, like, that sounds like a lot of pressure to them too. If you're just like, I'm going to give you 2 days at work for you to show me that this is my passion.
Yeah.
Oh, let's just cool down a little bit.
Yeah, lower the stakes a little bit.
Right.
Yeah, I think a better way to frame it to people who are resistant to committing to one thing, I feel like, is just if you don't like the results in your life and you've never actually committed to something for even a year or 2, then like just try it. I think a lot of people look at high performers who release an album, have a TV show, do all these things, and they're like, well, if that person can do it, I can do it. But it's like they have a lot of capital coming in for whatever things they're doing. Let's get your money thing under control with one thing and then start to do those other things.
And a lot of practice. My cousin is a stand-up comedian, which, holy cow, talk about a job I would not have the resilience to do. And I love watching him perform. But really, I get so interested when we get a chance to just talk and sort of talk about the work. And I'm so fascinated by his process. Hours of practicing in front of the mirror the facial expression, like which part of the joke needs a small little, twist of the lips or wink or like a hand gesture to really make it land. And how many times he will go to just like terrible clubs and just be willing to flop in order to test out all of these different things. That's commitment.
Yeah.
And I think that's the part of commitment we tend to shy away from. It's easy for us creatives to just be like, I'm too creative and fun to commit to something for 3 years. And it's just like, well, maybe it's not a timeline we should be looking at. I think the biggest thing is being willing to commit to doing some of the hard stuff for long enough to see if we can get good at it. But then also, this is the harder part for me, being willing to commit by telling people this is what I want and this is what I'm trying to do, letting go of the fear that what if it doesn't work, and feeling like it's so easy for me to just say, I'm not going to put everything into this, because then when it doesn't work, I can just be like, well, I've been working on multiple things. And, that ego part of me that doesn't want to deal with a flop when I have committed myself fully, like that's way scarier. Flopping on something where we were holding a part of ourselves back, we can always just say like, yeah, I really didn't think that was going to work from the get-go. That's the commitment that I think really counts.
Have you ever heard of like saboteurs?
I mean, I'm assuming this is about sabotage.
I don't know. I heard this one coach on some podcast talking about how he's like a specialist in saboteurs, and there's like, 12 of them or something. You take a little quiz and it's like, here's what your saboteurs are.
Oh my gosh.
Mine were number 1, avoidance, and number 2, people pleasing. And I was like, that's it. All of my problems are related to avoidance and people pleasing and avoidance commingling and all.
So this is like the foil to strength finders. It's like, know your strengths, but also know your saboteurs.
Saboteurs, yeah. But I liked that label because it made it almost like an evil person kind of thing. Where I'm like, oh, okay,
right.
Yeah.
Where it's like not really you, Alec. Like, no, this is my saboteur.
Yeah.
People pleasing.
It's like a little gremlin or something
Yes.
like that. But I guess we haven't quite gotten past you starting Muddies.
I'm so sorry.
No, don't be sorry. I'm the one trying to steer the ship here.
I just dive in all the way.
Yeah, I think we can sort of just go back a little bit so that the people who don't know you can just get a little bit more. But you kind of decide on this one thing of baking, and then how's that experience?
So it started from home, and I did not commit at that point. So this is where it was still sort of dabbling. I was in a career that I was definitely not committed to. I was a real estate agent, and I was bad at it. If you want a person who's good at it, contact my mom. She's fantastic. I wasn't. And I think the reason that I wasn't was the commitment. Looking back, it's not that I was incapable of doing the skills. It's that I was unwilling to really commit to putting in the time, making that work, doing the slog of like being a little bad at it in order to get good at it. So yeah, I was super uncommitted to that job. And meanwhile, I was baking as a hobby, and it kind of developed a little side business. And, at first it was sort of just like, again, one more thing that, I'm sort of dabbling with while I'm waiting for my true passion to just sweep me off my feet. And it started to grow a little bit. Looking back, I kind of feel like, in a horror movie, everybody in the audience knows what's going on. And like the person on screen is kind of like a dummy. Like, why are you investigating in the dark in your nighty?
Yeah.
Like,
don't go outside.
Don't. That's everybody knows that. That's so stupid.
Yeah.
Yeah, that was probably me. Probably me. I was, oh my gosh. I mean, I was just really in a bad emotional place and feeling like I was completely stuck and just falling behind and didn't know what I wanted to do. And I'm supposed to be an adult and like, what the hell am I doing? And, I was praying a lot, just constantly for this thing that I'm supposed to do to please hurry up and find me. Because also real estate is 100% commission, and you can't be super bad at it for a really long time without getting really hungry. So like, come on. And for a while there, this fervent prayer was happening, and I was honestly getting like more and more depressed, and just a lot going on. While that was happening, I was actually getting more and more business for the things that I was baking. So this like little side business hobby that I was not willing to fully commit to was actually picking up steam. And I feel like God was probably just being like, seriously? Like, you keep talking. Why aren't you listening? Like,
Yeah.
I'm telling, here is the answer. This is an opportunity to try something.
Yeah. Sometimes stuff is so obvious and it's like you just don't have the right frame of mind to recognize it.
Yeah. And, I just didn't consider that as a thing to take seriously. I'm not really totally sure why, but for whatever reason, that didn't feel like something that was a real option. I know why. Because I don't have any experience in business and I didn't go to culinary school and I never worked in a bakery. That's it.
There you go.
So I wasn't actually crazy for thinking that this like might not be a great idea.
Yeah.
But it was, it was happening regardless and it was fun to work on. So I also found myself more and more procrastinating from my real job by working on my fake job.
Mm.
And, now my fake job is my real job.
It's a telltale sign. Yeah.
Yeah. So the audience was probably like, lady, pay attention, all the clues.
I mentioned to you Jen Frank, who was my coach when I was like 26 and completely lost. And she was a guest on the show. But I went to her being like, I don't know what I'm supposed to do. And she's a career coach. And we were in a small group. And like a couple weeks in, she was just like, all right, everybody, raise your hand if you think Alec needs to do podcasting. And everybody raised their hands. And it had not even crossed my mind to like think about quote unquote doing podcasting. But I guess to everyone else, it was completely obvious and I wouldn't shut up about it. And like, that's kind of why we're here now, is because I was like, oh, is that realization? And I was lucky to have that opportunity to have that feedback. But I think the podcasting and the baking here are almost the same thing, where it's so obvious to a lot of people.
Well, and like you're not hearing yourself as much. So what I think is so interesting about that, you mentioned that, you couldn't stop talking about it. So they all had heard, like, you had a bad case of mentionitis. And like,
I like that.
I mean, that's honestly, it's the same with careers, same with boys. Like, I remember being in my early 20s. So when my now husband and I were like, just kind of hanging out as friends, my mom's friend totally called me out on that. She's like, you like this guy, Thomas. And I'm like, what? No, like, we're just friends. And she's like, no, we've been sitting here at lunch for 40 minutes and you have mentioned him in passing like 10 times. You like this guy. And like, it took me another few months to realize that she was absolutely correct. But like, yeah, whether it's a person in our lives or this job, like, I love the idea that you were just mentioning podcasting and talking about podcasting with no self-awareness that you were talking about it.
Exactly.
So much.
Not even realizing that my mouth was saying those things.
But
yeah. So that's interesting. And so then you start to pivot over to baking from real estate.
Yeah.
And what is that like?
It's kind of like with real estate, I just did less and less of it, which wasn't hard since I wasn't doing a whole lot to begin with. But yeah, the baking, I think I really started taking it seriously. Once that shift happened, I really, had a lot of conversations with God about it. And really had to make a commitment out loud and really I was scared to death. I felt like this is the dumbest thing. This is unwise for all of the reasons that I mentioned. And I really just felt like, okay, I've got to do this because if nothing else, I've got to just commit to something and take a risk and put myself out there. And I need to completely get over the fact that it might not work. And in fact, probably won't work. Mm-hmm. And still commit myself 100%. So I still remember the conversation I had, just like, as you do driving. I feel like driving or showering are the two places that you are free to just have those conversations out loud.
Yep.
And just saying, okay, there's some momentum here. I'm interested in this. I think it's probably gonna not work. But all right, I'm in. I am in all the way, success or failure. And saying that out loud, I think just was a huge pivot moment for me. Because from that point on, I could stop waffling about, am I going to commit? Do I want to do this? I mean, it's that like every single day when you're in that thing, it's like, oh, that's just so icky and gross. And every single day, like, oh, am I going to do this again today? Versus just making the decision to say, okay, this might be the stupidest decision I've ever made in my entire life, but I'm making it and I'm all in. where do we go from here? Now I can actually start hitting the gas instead of just this like horrible gas brake, gas brake, gas brake.
Totally. And yeah, I think like the weight of indecision and just the static noise that it has in the background of your mind, you don't even realize it's there. And making decisions is important, committing to things is important, and then like learning to say no to things and subtracting. Because I've always come from the place of like, oh, I can add things to solve problems. When like the older I get, I'm like, what would it feel like if we canceled that project or canceled that client? And it's like, you feel like the relief of if like that was gone. It's like, oh, like I need to solve problems through subtraction.
Yes. You know? Yes.
Yeah.
And that can be a hard lesson, but I'm so glad you brought that up. Yeah. Saying yes to the right things, saying no to things. And yeah, just moving forward. You don't have to do stuff for forever either, but just not having that. I like your term, the weight of indecision. Also, is there anything grosser or more tedious for yourself or others than just like obsessing about yourself all the time? Like, that's the worst.
Yeah.
So that's the other thing that I think was going on is like once I decided to do something, I could start thinking about it outside of myself. I could start thinking about, you know, what do I want this to be like? How do I want people to feel when they're in the space? How do I want, like, if I'm going to open a bakery, well, I can't do that completely by myself. I'm going to have to hire people. What kind of boss do I want to be? What do I need to learn in order to do this well, not just for myself, but for the people around me? And dang, that was so much easier to get some momentum, because before that, it was just this daily depression of like me, which is just like, well, that sounds like it sucks. No wonder it sucked.
Yeah. We forget how much isolation affects us as human beings, I think. Because, yeah, like I'm stuck in the studio a lot all day alone. I'm a major extrovert. I know you're an introvert, but like I get home and I'm just like, I want to just talk through ideas. So that's why I'm glad you're here, because I can get to talk to somebody. But yeah, it's really nice when you actually have people around. I think we're built to want to be around people.
Yeah, even if there's imaginary people. You know, I didn't have that many real customers at that point, but I was certainly hoping there would be some customers willing to come.
Yeah.
So, yeah, I started to think about them and what do I think is going to be important to them, and what do they want to sit down, or do they want to not, or are they going to be bringing their families, or picking stuff up and taking it home to family? Like, all of those questions were so much more energizing to deal with than like, Kat Gordon, what are you doing with your life?
Yeah.
That feels so much weightier. Whereas I could sink my teeth into questions like, how will you create a welcoming space? How will you create a good place for people to have a job for however long? Like, those are still big questions, but you can start to get progress on them. It was really clear to me that like, well, I've never been a boss before. I should probably go to the library and start reading some books. Okay. I've never had an open to the public. I've had parties, but I'm not responsible to the health department for those parties. Maybe I should go read the health code to know what I need to know in order to host people in a space this way. It got so much easier to start taking some steps forward.
And I think like with something like real estate, it's like a huge thing, just like baking, and there's all those million steps you have to take. But if you don't have that vision at the end, or that kind of motivation from deep inside pulling you through, like for me personally, I've been really bad at a lot of jobs, and I've been like, what's wrong with me? And it's only like later in life that I realized like, oh, like it sounds selfish, but I'm only really good at stuff that I'm actually motivated in from my passion or soul or whatever.
Aren't we all?
We all are, yeah.
Human beings are incredible creatures. We figure out how to do what we want and not do what we don't want. And then we will make up all sorts of really great reasons for why, so that it was like an intelligent, measured decision. But I do truly believe that deep down, we do what we want.
What I was trying to say was that you having passion and emotion towards it makes it easy to be like, oh, like I'll read the health department thing. Whereas whatever the health department version of that is for real estate, it's like, oh, like I'll never be able to make that next step because that sounds overwhelming. You know,
because it's like I don't want to read the health code.
Yeah.
For my bakery, but I want what's on the other end more.
Yeah.
And yeah, I already decided I was going to do it. So I think it's like people, I know Clark Butcher from Victory
Yes.
Bikes. Like he talks a lot about just like getting into the cleats. I think those are the fancy bike shoes. Like get the cleats and just ride for a mile. Just start. Don't just weigh yourself down with thoughts about like, oh, how much gear do I need and where, you'll just kill it before you even start. But just start.
Yeah. I feel like it's hard to start an Instagram profile for a business and have 0 pictures and 0 followers and just be like, oh, like, am I going to be judged or whatever? But then 2 years later, you're like, oh, I'm glad I did that.
Yeah. Exactly. Or you're like, oh, I wish I hadn't done that. I'm not enjoying this anymore. Bloop.
Bye-bye.
And okay. Like, that's okay too.
Yeah.
You probably learned something from it.
Exactly.
These things don't have to be permanent. We can do projects too.
Yeah. Yeah. I think the whole like don't quit thing is
toxic.
sort of toxic a little bit because it's like you should quit a lot of stuff in life.
Yeah.
Yeah. I guess maybe we should just label it a subtraction.
I know. I'm just imagining like I kind of like a varsity jacket that says like quitter on the back. Especially this last year. Like I quit so many things last year. I'm just like, nope, not doing that anymore. Not doing that. Mm-mm.
Okay, we'll have to get
Minus,
into
subtract.
what you were quitting.
Not doing it. Like,
yeah.
Yeah, maybe we should just be a little prouder of, hey, what have you quit lately that has made your life better?
And I think once you're willing to subtract things, you start to realize what you've been doing because you think you should be doing it.
Yeah. And you quickly learn what other people actually care about and not. Not that you should live your life just for other people, but I think there's a balance there. But some of the things that we convince ourselves, I guess this is the ego again, but like the world is going to fall apart if I don't do this anymore. Or like these people are going to be devastated if I don't do this anymore.
Yeah.
Well,
I'll
turns out it wasn't that important.
Yeah. I'll like agonize over a font in like a services document to send to a potential client. I'm like, Alec, like, you could have just sent that, but now it's like 3 or 4 hours later and you're still tweaking the freaking font.
Right. Like unless it was in Comic Sans, they probably didn't care.
Yeah. Yeah, just accidentally blow it with Comic Sans. But okay, so I keep going on all these tangents. So now Muddies is sort of becoming a thing. You're brick and mortaring, you're hiring a team. I know you're like a big visioner. How would you say that?
Visioneer.
There you go.
That sounds right.
Yeah, that sounds really cool too.
Yeah, it does. Like a Mouseketeer, but grown up.
I'm a visioneer with saboteurs.
Oh my God.
We just have all these fancy words. Yeah. But yeah, so I know you're big into visioning. I love visioning. My Enneagram is a 7, which is sort of labeled as like an enthusiastic visionary.
Yeah, there are the fun ones that everyone loves.
Hey, thank God. Gotta be loved. Gotta be liked. It's a problem. But like the enthusiastic visionary is the label. And when I saw that label, I was like, oh, yes. Because I could do the visioning thing all day. And so when I meet people like you who do it professionally, I get really excited. So can you go into a little bit about how you got like into that?
Yeah, absolutely. I think this is something that is probably pretty natural to a lot of people. I was an English major, art history minor. So visuals are already important to me, both word and image. So it's not surprising that visioning definitely clicks for me. But I think even for folks that don't consider themselves particularly creatives or artistic, I think this is something I think about my mom. She's this amazing realtor. Visioning as a concept is hard for her because she has self-labeled herself as not a creative person. And I'm just like, but can you describe for me what a good day looks like tomorrow? Probably. Because it's really about what you want and getting in touch with your wants and not about how well did you craft a story or paint a picture for other people. So I do think that that's something to really, really look out for because that's what visioning is. Visioning is just tapping into what do you want the future to look like? And I think more importantly, feel like and why. That's where we really find the juice. So I think this is something that I've had sort of a complicated history with visioning. I think I've always done it at some level. When I was getting the bakery open, first and foremost, I mean, I had little diagrams that I had sketched and things in Microsoft Paint when that was still a thing, sort of showing, here's what I want this experience to feel like. It doesn't mean it needs to look literally exactly like this, but this encapsulates the vibe. When I learned visioning with a capital V, I learned it initially from Zingerman's in Ann Arbor. Went up there for a 2-day seminar.
What is Zingerman's?
Zingerman's is a deli, but it is actually now a community of businesses. So I don't know how many, maybe 13 independent businesses that are essentially voluntarily connected via brand and values.
Cool.
And my friend and mentor, Maggie Bayless, was the longtime managing partner at their business training business. Mm-hmm. And they teach a 2-day visioning seminar. It was really, really awesome. And I felt myself surprisingly resistant to a lot of it. I had taken several of their classes and really, really loved them. And I was like, visioning, that totally sounds up my alley. And then I learned a little bit more about it. And I was like, the INTJ came out hardcore. I was like, this feels really woo-woo. No, thank you.
Yeah.
I'm in the wrong room. And, I think I really just appreciate Maggie's such a good friend. And, she is such an incredibly practical person that I think that helped provide me a little bit of a bridge. She was able to encourage me to still wrestle with it a little bit more instead of just dismissing it and being like, all right, peace out. I'll see you all for the next one. And I'm really, really glad she did. And she was able to kind of coach me a little bit through it. My first couple of visions that I wrote after the class were pretty terrible in terms of, what a vision should or shouldn't be, because I am very skilled at writing myself a to-do list and assigning myself things. Mm-hmm. So my first few drafts were probably a lot less descriptive of what it is I actually wanted for myself and much more evocatively described things I was going to accomplish.
Yeah.
Which isn't really the goal.
Can you give an example of sort of a to-do listy vision line?
Oh, yeah. So this is a really good one. I was invited to do a vision camp for the seniors at St. Mary's, my alma mater, this year in lieu of their career day, which is super fun. And one of the examples that we used was their end of year celebrations, which, as you can imagine, had to change up a lot from tradition. But we also talked about the next 5 years for them. So if you think back to when you were in 12th grade, what's the question every adult in your life is asking you?
Yeah, what are you going to do with your life?
Yeah,
what are you going to study?
Where are you going to go to college? Yeah. I want to just give the asterisk here. I'm not telling anybody that they shouldn't go to college, but I'm also not telling anybody that they should.
Yeah.
And we can think about that is such a good example of a to-do list item. Because if we're starting with the assumption that, well, you just go to college, that's the next thing on the to-do list, you can actually start writing a vision all about all the things that you're going to achieve at college and completely miss the point that you started with a giant ass to-do item, where maybe what's going to be more effective is just forget going to a specific college for starters, possibly forget college altogether, and just write about how you want to feel in 5 years. College might end up being a really key part of that and a great stepping stone. But it's a means to an end, and we treat it like it's the end itself.
Definitely. Yeah. I went to a liberal arts school, which I think is a whole different kind of ball game, because we joked that it was called Camp Eckerd. It was like this little liberal arts school on the beach in Florida.
I was going to say Florida, right?
Yeah. And so I feel like my college experience doesn't line up with a lot of other people's where they were miserable and stuff, because I feel like it sort of taught me how to learn and love learning and stuff. But then again, I might have done the same thing if I was not in college. So I think you're totally right that everybody should think about their own path.
Yeah, and that shows up in a lot of areas. That's sort of a big macro example, but we assign ourselves tasks all the time without assessing whether we why are we doing them?
Yeah.
What's the reason that it's there? Is that pulling me closer to where I actually want to go? Or is it just something that's there by default because I thought that I was supposed to?
You have a 4-bedroom house on your vision board, but you also said you want to be traveling everywhere for the next 5 years. Right. Are those compatible?
If you want to be traveling everywhere for 5 years, you might want to rent.
Yeah, exactly.
That's not a bad decision.
But then everybody says, you have to own a house. So it's one of those to-do list things. So,
so you just you don't even stop and question it. So that's where I have found the most value in visioning, is the more I've practiced it and the better I've gotten at it. It's really just built up my muscle to ask why. Why is this important to me? Is this important to me? Or did I write this because I thought that I just should? There's a lot that can be learned from a first draft, but only if you've done the work to have an honest first draft.
Yeah.
And probably my first couple of years of writing visions, I did not have honest first drafts because I am an Enneagram 1. I think it is my responsibility to make sure every single person on the planet is happy, healthy, and safe. And boy, is that so kind and arrogant at the same time.
What are they called? What is the one called?
The one, it kind of depends who you're talking to, but it's like the savior / perfectionist.
Okay.
Which neither of those sounds super healthy.
Yeah. Have you ever read The Road Back to You?
No.
Okay. It's like the Enneagram book, but it's really cool. So I'm going to go back and read the chapter on ones and be like, okay, that's Kat.
Yeah, boy. It's like 1 mixed with INTJ mixed with eldest child is like a super potent, I am responsible for everyone cocktail. So my first draft visions are often so dripping with this, what do other people need and expect for me to be? And how can I not disappoint anyone ever?
Yeah.
And I've really had to practice going back and examining that and learning the difference between disappointing people and harming people. That disappointing people does not equal harming people. Somebody not getting everything that they want is not the same as me harming them.
And you've got the N in the INTJ that I share as well. And I think that intuition connects you to other people's feelings and emotions so strongly sometimes that it's like, oh, well, I know I need to raise the price on that client, but there's this dissonance in sending that email. They're going to hate me. And
oh, yeah. We spin this huge story about it.
It's crazy.
And then 9 times out of 10, they write back totally understood. Love working with you. Great.
Yeah.
And you're like, oh my God, I'm still sweating from sending that email. What? And yeah, it's this bizarre reminding myself that I'm usually a cameo in someone else's life is really helpful.
That's good.
I took up almost no screen time in their story. So I need to not act like that half second was just the most important thing on the planet.
That's true for everything. If obsessing over an email newsletter or something, it's are people really gonna be combing through your email newsletter with a fine tooth comb, looking for where you messed up?
Yeah, if they are, great.
Yeah.
Thrilled that they're paying such close attention.
Yeah.
Awesome.
But yeah, we do sometimes act as if everyone's looking at us with a magnifying glass when it's not the case at all.
Yeah.
So you get into visioning, you write your first few drafts, and then has there been an example of something that you've done in your visioning exercises that you feel like you've manifested and it's been oh, cool, that was there and now it's here kind of moment?
Absolutely. I think the most recent example is last year we shared, and this was a team vision for the bakery, and it's available on our website. Anybody can read about how we envision Muddy's looking Christmas Eve of 2022. So that's lesson 1 with visioning. Be very, very specific about what's the place, what's the setting, because then you can kind of start to tell that story. So we are actively working towards that vision now. And we published it towards the end of last year. And so this was a shorter term, long-term vision than we usually do. But it's been amazing to see how quickly, we are using that as our guide as we're doing things. So it's been really fun to see, there's stuff that we wrote about that we wanted it to look and feel like that you can see it manifesting. You can see it starting to happen. Some of it physically in the space, but a lot of it, and I think the parts of it that have the most juice are really the parts that talk about what's the vibe, what's the energy, how do people feel in the space. One thing we did that I think is a great example of this is, we talk about in our vision how we want people to feel welcome, feel fun. It needs to feel approachable to a variety of ages. We put in a bubble machine outside. Our vision does not explicitly state that we should have a bubble machine. We just talked about how we wanted people to feel approaching our space and walking into it. The bubble machine was something that we were able to do. That is a tactic and a specific thing that meets that objective.
Yeah.
There are any number of other things that we could have done at the entrance to the store that I'm sure would still meet that objective. And that's the beauty for us of visioning. Once you're really clear about what is the actual target, you have tons of flexibility in terms of how you get there. You know, if one thing doesn't work out, okay, you can try another thing and you still are aiming for that bullseye of what the thing is you want to accomplish.
Yeah, I think a lot of people do get stuck on I can't write that down because I don't know how I'm going to do it. And it's like, well, you can know what you want the living room of the house you want to build to feel like, but you're not the architect and you're not the general contractor and you're not the contracted worker who's going to cut the wood. Like, those people know how to do it. You just have to know the vibe and be able to communicate that, you know?
Exactly. So like our designer who's helping me with our space expansion to do our teaching classroom next door, she got a copy of our vision. And we're like, okay, this is what we're going for. Here's how we want people to feel. And, you know, and we wrote a separate sort of vision elaborating on that particular space and how we envision people using it. And we wrote it as if you were someone arriving, you know, the reader is the one arriving for a class.
Yeah.
To take a baking class at Muddy's. And like, what does that journey look like? How does that person feel at the end of their class? And, you know, it didn't get super granular about like, what is the floor tile? And yeah, and like, what is this? But it did kind of talk about, you know, how many other people are in class with you? Okay. If there are 11 other people in class with you, well, that gives Anne some really key information about how we should set up the work tables and how many electrical plugs we need. And because that means 12 people are taking this class. So yeah, I mean, I think that's some stuff that has been really great and really recently available with the visioning.
You said that's available online?
Yeah.
Okay, cool. How long is it? Like 2 pages?
Yes.
Okay.
So our long-term vision is 2 pages, and that was a very deliberate decision this time. Our first long-term vision that we wrote as a team was back in 2015. It was like a 6 or 7 page vision. And it is a great example of a to-do listy vision. And that was our first time as an organization doing a huge vision that the entire team had input on.
Yeah.
And I think that that's something the 2 visions are a great example of how we were using that when we were brand new at using it and honestly not that great at using it. And then what it looks like once we have an organizational history of using this tool on large and small projects, like, well, we get better at it.
And when you do a draft of that, do you then have like a copywriter like punch it up to make it pop or anything?
Yeah.
Okay.
It's ours. We do it, warts and all.
Gotcha. Have you read the Vivid Vision book?
No, but that sounds like a punchy title.
Okay. It sounds as if you've read it and you're like proselytizing that book. So I'm like, I need to send you at least that guy on a podcast interview because I think you'd be like, that's exactly what you're talking about.
Well, here's the thing. So I've used visioning personally and professionally for a long time now. I teach visioning workshops. But I think the best thing, if somebody's even at all curious about it, getting started, there's a little thing that we do in the visioning process that works really well to just pull out. And it can be a standalone thing that is still really valuable. And it's what we call prouds, which I totally just got from the folks at Zingerman's who initially taught me visioning. I have since made this process, like I've really modified it a lot. Like we have taken things that worked and didn't work for us. But the prouds is something that like I've not edited. It's just straight up from them. But they are really insistent that when you sit down to write a vision, you need to start with just take a minute and write down stuff that you're proud of. Related to the vision or not, it doesn't matter. But it's all about creating a headspace that has a little momentum for possibility. I can tell, like, and that is one of those woo-woo ones that, like, early on, I would write my vision. I would do a vision draft, and I'd be like, I can skip this step and maybe not do it. I promise, I can tell, like, I now have over a decade worth of vision drafts of different things that I've written for. I can tell which ones I skipped that step on and which I didn't. Like, the ones that I skipped, the prouds, just lack life and energy. They're not as vibrant. But writing down the things that you're proud of, and the things that sort of give you that proud feeling, that is an activity you don't even have to write a vision. Try just writing for 1 minute every day or every week for however long you want, just like a couple weeks or a couple months, but try doing that over a certain amount of time and see the difference it makes, but also identify trends. That has been the big one for me. And like, I discovered this by accident because the folks at Zimmerman's were so adamant that you not skip the prouds. It means that I have documented so many lists of prouds over such a huge period of time. And when I go back and look at that, regardless of the visions that I wrote, there are some really obvious things that leap out.
So like, what would be an example of a trend that jumped out?
The best example I have is actually an example of something that is an absence rather than a presence.
Okay.
The most obvious thing that does not show up on my prouds list for years. I never once in all my years of doing visions and teaching visions did I write down in my prouds list that I was proud to have a 3-location business. Never. And that should be like, talk about the assumptions that we make, like, oh, everyone should go to college, regardless of whether it's actually a fit for us or not.
Yeah.
One of those massive assumptions is that growth is good.
Yeah.
More is good.
Better.
Obviously, every business wants to be bigger. So the fact that it never once showed up in my list of prouds is really notable. And nothing even really related, like nothing related to, yay, I've grown my business, or I'm excited about this bigger business, or like I'm getting a real ego rush from having multiple locations. Like any of the prouds that were sort of touching on that I had were always around, you know, I might have been proud to overcome a certain obstacle in that process, or really proud of a skill that I learned by getting bigger. But in terms of like thinking about the ends and the things that I was like really pumped about, that was something that looking back through a whole bunch of stuff was like, oh, wow, there is something missing here that is really surprising. And then when I stopped and thought about it, not surprising at all, because I know myself pretty well.
Yeah. And so to the people out there in other areas of the United States who don't know Muddy's, you guys had 3 locations, and then throughout COVID, you've compressed it to what now?
1.
Okay.
So I have shed a lot. What we call it. We said subtraction, not quitting, right? I have subtracted a lot.
Yeah. But I bet that feels really great, right?
It feels amazing.
Yeah.
So yeah, that's one that's not there. But then, you know, it's like some of the stuff that is there on some prouds. You know, I've been really proud. One of the things that's important to me is how I lead a team. That's probably the thing that I'm more passionate about than baking. I love cookies and cupcakes and everything so much, but talk about the thing that I had no idea at 26 would be a thing that I'm passionate about. That I just never would have imagined that being my Prince Charming in the woods is something. When I look at my prouds, a lot of the stuff that I'm really proud of is skills that I've learned in that area and ways that I've been able to make an impact in that area. So that obviously, looking just at all of that data, that obviously means something to me. So I need to remember that going forward, because that's what visioning is actually all about, is figuring out like, okay, what are our future prouds? What's future me going to be really proud of?
And so like, do you feel like now that you've compressed subtracted the locations and you've recognized that trend sort of after the fact, do you feel like you can now look at trends where they are now and be like, what's there that I'm not necessarily seeing that's obvious, and like analyze that?
I think I'm getting better at it.
Okay. Because I was like, that sounds tough, but very cool.
Right. And I do think the prouds activity just helps with that so much, because it's such an easy assessment of just kind of where are you? What gives you that feeling? It's also something I'm a big believer in values, but it can be a little intimidating as a business owner or a creative or a human to sit down and say, all right, what are my 3 to 5 most important guiding values? Like, there's a bunch that are important. Most of us have lots of values and things are important to us. But I think that you can actually work backwards through the prouds. Use the prouds activity and see like, all right, well, what keeps coming up? Guess what? That's your value.
Yeah. I always joke because the building we're in downstairs in the lobby, in one of their like opening lobby area doors, there's like our company values, and it's like 27 values. It looks absurd.
So is excess one of those values?
Yeah, I always just think about how absurdly big their values list is. But yeah, we talked a little bit about values with Jen and just how like you can kind of trace those back from peak experiences and things like that.
Yeah.
And that, all of this is super helpful for kind of guiding people and helping them find their way. So I know we're already at 56 minutes. So we could go into leadership because you were talking about that. But can we skip ahead to money? And do you have a hard out?
No, I'm good. I'm working from home today.
Okay. Can we just go like a few more minutes?
And as you know, I already cleaned up a lot of dog vomit, so I could do whatever.
Yes, and I don't have to feed the squirrel till like 3:30. So
that is going to be my favorite sentence of the entire day. It's just like the casual delivery. I don't have to feed the squirrel until 3:30.
Yes, the baby squirrel, folks, is in the studio. Yeah, I was joking with some people that like I forgot to respond to an email because my ADD was literally distracted by a squirrel this week. So, yeah.
That's great. I mean, how often can you really legitimately blame a squirrel for
I know.
that?
And I could not believe that thing survived. I was like, there's no way this thing's going to live. But
we had a little tiny kitten stuck in our like ditch drain outside the bakery this week. It was down there 2 days. Half people on the street were trying to get the sucker out. I mean, like trying to put cardboard down there to make a ramp. I mean, animal control came out, and like the nicest girl from animal control spent ages in the hot sun, like using a rope to put food down there, and like could not get this kitten up. It was still there the next day. Finally, it went over to the other side of the street drain, which was a little shallower. Finally, like made its way up, hid in our electrician's engine. And so our electrician, with his like big work gloves, gets this little kitten out.
Oh my God.
I mean, one of my folks, like right after her shift, was just like actually lying on the ground. I thought she was going to fall into the ditch. Like she was just like everyone was trying so hard to save this kitten. So yeah, happy ending. The kitten is safe and sound. And our project supervisor adopted her and is now walking around wearing her on like a little kitty sling. Our like 5'2" construction project manager who's just like marching around, you know.
What did they name her?
Yelling at plumbers and carrying a kitten.
Yeah.
Muddy Jane.
I was like, there's got to be some branding there.
She's so cute. And she's probably about the size of that squirrel.
Oh.
Yeah.
Yeah, my girlfriend's a teacher, and her class named him Alvin. So he's not a chipmunk, but close enough.
It still feels appropriate.
It does, yeah. Well, that's a very sweet story. I was really scared that the interview was about to crash and burn.
No.
Where you're like, and he didn't make it. Yeah. The meowing stopped on day 4.
God.
Yeah.
No.
Well, good. Happy ending. Okay, so moving on to a subject that I like to talk about money. I know you mentioned you like to talk about money.
I do.
And so what was your mindset about money when you started out, and how has it changed?
Money, I'm just happy we're talking about this because money is something that I think so many of us are really uncomfortable talking about. And I just even loved hearing you say, you know, you love talking about money. I'm like, yeah, damn right I do. And I would love to just go back to my younger self and tell her, like, one day, you're going to not only be comfortable about talking about money, you're going to like talking about money.
Me too.
It feels so awesome.
I never would have thought I'd be interested in business or entrepreneurship. Never would have thought I'd be interested in money. But then here we are.
Yeah. And I have money baggage. I'm still fighting some of the money baggage. My general mindset, just for personal money, has very much always been a saving mindset. Deciding to throw away my savings, opening a business that I was not qualified to open in the bakery was seriously the most out of character money decision in the world for me. But I mean, I'm very conservative with money. I've always been a saver. Growing up as a kid, my parents, it was like if we had been good and not fought all day long, you know, when the ice cream man came by, we would each get $1 to go spend at the ice cream man. And my parents definitely believed, like, once they gave us that $1, it was our $1. So spend or save. And my brothers would totally spend their $1 and buy that delicious Mickey Mouse pop at like ice cream. I would buy the cheapest thing on that van, which was a 25-cent popsicle, and keep the 75 cents.
I love that. I thought you were going to say you just saved the $1, but I love that you like still got the popsicle.
Because if you didn't, they would just stop giving us the
Yeah.
No. So you still got to buy something and enjoy that popsicle. But I really enjoyed having that 75 cents too. So that's kind of where I came from. But in terms of a business and money, that's something that I think money is so tied up in our ideas of success, honestly, for good or for ill. So for me, more of my baggage has been around the idea of profit than around money itself. So part of my entrepreneurial journey is just riddled with, the ups and downs of profit and feeling self-conscious if we are profitable, and then feeling like really, really stressed and unhappy if we're not profitable. There's a book that I read ages ago. I think it was You Are a Badass. It was one of the ones we did for Muddy's book club ages ago.
I've read that book like 4 or 5 times.
Well, then you can tell me if this is correctly where I'm thinking of this. But the anecdote was of a relationship with money or profit or whatever, where you're basically like, when it's there, you're like, oh my God, you're the worst. I hate you. And I hate myself when I'm with you. And then when the money leaves, you're like, oh, where are you? I really need you. Come back. I'm dying without you. And it's just like, well, you wouldn't want to stay in an abusive relationship like that. So stop treating your money or your profit as as a partner that you're abusing by constantly gaslighting. So figuring out healthy profit. So the way that I started doing that, tackling my own money demons in the business, was really being intentional about making Muddy's. This has happened a few years in, a triple bottom line business. So we have 3 measured bottom lines that we need to track. So if you imagine like a 3-legged stool, all 3 of the legs on those stool are integral to that being a healthy, functioning stool. Yes.
I love that metaphor. That's cool.
And, inevitably, some of those one might get a little bit out of whack, and then the stool's going to wobble a little bit, but still be pretty functional. So it's like, all right, if one's, you pay attention to it.
Yeah.
But if one gets really out of whack, that sucker's coming down. So our 3 bottom lines are outstanding experiences, delicious food, and healthy profit.
Can you repeat those?
Outstanding experiences, delicious food, and healthy profit. And the word choice is really intentional, as always at Muddy's. English major. But the outstanding experiences, we specifically, I think the first draft, we had great customer service, but we really wanted to expand that because we thought, okay, we need to have those outstanding experiences be for everyone. It needs to be for me, the owner. The experience is important. For my staff, for ourselves and our team, certainly for our customers, also to our suppliers and our neighbors. So having outstanding experiences is a more holistic descriptor than just great service. Great service is a huge part of that.
I like that. It's not one directional.
Right.
It's like an aura around the area.
Right.
Yeah.
And then delicious food, I think, is probably the most straightforward. But I think the important thing is that it's not just the profit. We need those other 2. The other 2, the experiences and the food, are not just means to a profitable end. For us, they are ends unto themselves.
They're equals with the profit.
Yes.
Yeah.
And I think for some businesses and companies, that might be sort of the revolutionary thing, is like, oh, we're going to make these things as important as the profit. For me, it was the other way around. For me, I have no problem making those 2 things a huge priority.
Yeah.
For me, having that 3rd leg of the stool be healthy profit has been really, really crucial. And we chose the word healthy for a reason also. We want to acknowledge there is some profit that's healthy and there's some profit that's unhealthy. Not all profit is created equal. There's such a thing as too little profit, and there is such a thing as too much profit. So we really want to be constantly assessing and hitting things in the right spot. So that was really helpful for us in terms of a money mindset. But then I think the next thing that has been most helpful has been going open book as a company. Adopting open book practices, learning how to use open book management has been really important. And it's not just about transparency, it's about participation.
And can you explain that a little bit to me and the listeners, what you mean by that?
Yeah, sure. So open book, you think about like the financial books. That's the book that's being referred to there. And the idea is that think about your company, no matter how many people are in that company, even if it's just one. Think about your company as a sports team is the best way to think about it. How many situations are you in where you're playing a sport game and you are unaware of the rules or the score. How effective is that team going to be just thrown out on the field with no idea of, are we in the first quarter? Are we in the third quarter? Have we scored lately? What does it take to win? Like, that would be the worst sports game ever.
Yeah, because the team's attitude's going to be way different if they're up by 100 with 1 minute to go versus they're down by 100 with 3 or 4 quarters to go. You know, it's like totally different scenarios for the team.
Right, and everybody needs to know what the goals are. Everybody needs to know how they can personally contribute to those goals. And it's really important that everybody share in the win. So open book is really taking all of those to heart. So it's about a lot more than just numbers transparency, although that is really important.
Yeah.
So building a financially literate team, this last year especially, this is the most open book we've ever been and the most engaged. So like we've been open book for maybe 8 years, and I'd say we've just gotten better and better at it. But now that we are all one business and one team, and we all see each other every day, and we're a much more compact experience overall, we have just leveled up like 1,000 times as a team how engaged each of us is in that process. So that's been really, really helpful. And it's easier for me to stay aware of the importance of being profitable. Nothing will teach you that, like a disaster. It's like, oh yeah, this is why it's important for the business to actually make a profit. Like today's profit is tomorrow's roof and meals.
And I bet it decreases a lot of stress as the owner, because I feel like with a lot of entrepreneurs, you're always trying to kind of put on an air of like everything's under control. When it's not, then you sort of have that dissonance in your life of like, oh, I feel like I'm hiding something, or, you know, it just doesn't feel right.
Right.
When you're having to fake it and you're really stressed.
Right. And I think that's something too. I'm glad you brought that up. There are definitely times that I wish I had felt more comfortable sharing more of the story. And not that I think that it's everybody's business all the time. There is such a thing as oversharing.
Yeah.
But also just being aware as business people, especially in a community like Memphis. You know, Memphis is so supportive and so encouraging, and it's so small. So, I mean, people have access to each other. If I have a question for Karen Carrier, like, I can ask her. You know, we're not in New York or LA or something. But that also means I think that we do have a responsibility to the other people around us who are watching our highlight reel. And, you know, truthfully, end of 2014, 2015, Muddy's was a hair's breadth away from just imploding. I had no money.
Yeah.
If we had had direct deposit at that point, it would have been
game over. Yeah.
There were whole weeks where the only thing keeping the cash flow going was that, like, for whatever reason, you know, some of the employees had like not gotten around to depositing their paychecks yet. And that is so embarrassing to say out loud. And I wasn't saying it out loud then. Yeah. And even then we were an open book company, but like we weren't so good at it yet. And we were, you know, we had 60 employees spread across 3 locations and like a lot of part-timers. And, you know, it's a big ask to just like ask someone who's doing a part-time college job to like, hey, study the P&L and like learn this stuff and ask engaged questions and like hold everyone accountable. And, you know, that's great if they're interested, but it's a big ask. So we had a lot of people even in the company who weren't actually aware that we were not, quote unquote, successful financially. And certainly from the outside, it looked amazing. We just opened another location, you know, which is always celebrated. And if I'd been more honest about what was going on, like it might not have been a celebrate. You know, that's something. Yeah. And I think looking back, I realized how easy that would have been for other young entrepreneurs to look at that situation and think like, wow, how has she done it? Wow, that's what I want for my business. And not really realize that it was not working. And that wasn't good for employees. It wasn't good for me. It wasn't going to be good for our community if I just like mismanaged this business financially to where it just, next thing you know, is having a fire sale of all of its equipment and like, see you guys.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, I had a complete panic attack in a neighbor's yard because it's Memphis. They're like, walk out of their house like, oh, you're the money's lady. Hi. And I'm like, hi. And my husband's like, oh my God, like, what do we do? And they're like, we love your cupcakes. And I'm like, oh, I'm like, it's asthma. I'm having an asthma attack. And,
oh my God.
Yeah. So that happened. And, I think like we've all probably had those moments though. It's like, what's your front yard panic attack money story? I think, well, a lot of people probably have one.
Yeah. When COVID hit and the realizations were starting to happen of like, I might have to move out of here, but still be paying rent in here and like all that. Like I laid down on the floor like in mid-March and was just like burst into tears because I was like, I don't know what to do. Like, I don't know what's happening.
Yeah.
And yeah, I feel like everybody has those moments. But thank you for sharing that because I feel like a lot of people listen to things like this and they think, oh, she found her passion of baking. And it was just this, one line going straight up until now. And they don't realize there's all this turmoil and loops going up as we go.
Yeah. I think the other thing that I probably do want to share, and only because it ties in with some stuff that we've already talked about. So we talked about subtraction. And, it's no secret now, I've consolidated my business into one footprint. I also said we are an open book company, so I'm just going to like really go open book now. My entire staff knows the numbers. We go over all of the numbers every single week. I think the only thing hidden is like individuals' exact pay rates, but there are ranges published and like anybody with a calculator and common sense could probably figure them out. So I will now just share with all of your listeners some of our financials as well.
Awesome.
The key thing that I really want to point out is the difference that subtraction can make and being able to focus on things. More does not always equal more. And this is what I have really learned this past year. So I've learned money lessons just every year of my life. I've learned money lessons. This year's money lesson really came about in the most dramatic, like hit me in the face way when I wrapped up our second quarter profit and loss. So just for some brief context, second quarter in my business, it's the quarter that subsidizes the other quarters. Q2 is where we make our money. And I can just like go into why, but like whatever, Q2 has lots of small holidays. So it is a steady, busy quarter as opposed to like the Christmas season where like fourth quarter, we have some peaks, but it's not like one after the other. It's also less manageable. So second quarter is just like the most solid. It's always our most profitable quarter. So we did a comparison because, as I mentioned, this team that I'm working with now is especially motivated. Like we are just on it. They are all watching those numbers like a hawk. It is mutual accountability. It's incredible. So they have asked tons of good questions about our sales, about our expenses, like why this? How do we impact this number? All of these things. So, of course, they wanted to know at the end of our biggest quarter, how does this stack up to our past version? We're basically a new business that has a prior identity. And there's a lot that we're doing really, really differently. No one was expecting for these quarters to like match up, but I think it was a really natural question. Like, all right, we just finished what is expected to be our best quarter. What's the comparison? So I did a side-by-side P&L comparison of this year's second quarter to year before last. So we couldn't do 2020 because we were closed all of second quarter 2020. That was zero sales almost and $100,000 in overhead expenses. So we went back a year before
fun.
that.
Yeah.
And looked at 2019. And 2019 was probably the biggest we've been in a while compared to 2021, arguably the smallest we've been since our first couple of years. Our sales were $500,000 less. So 2019, we were selling $500,000 more than we did this year. Go down, 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 all sorts of all the expenses. And then you go down to that quote unquote bottom line. Look at the profit. Almost the same. Holy shit. What? Like, I had to run the numbers multiple times. And like, I was like,
what was
accounting.
that moment like where you're like, wait a second?
Right. I was like, there has to be a mistake here somewhere. I was just like, this cannot possibly be right.
Yeah.
And the kind of embarrassing other part of it is like, that's so amazing and I'm so proud of it. But it's not like we were just wildly profitable this year's second quarter. The real eye-opener was really recognizing how tight we were running it before.
Just lots of overhead having the 3 locations.
Yes, so much overhead, so much staffing. I put some other key numbers together. At that point, we were open, I think it was 155 hours a week, open to the public. So that didn't include working hours. We were baking. We had a 24-hour baking cycle, but just open hours was 155 hours a week at the 2 retail locations compared to 2021 Q2. We were open 17 hours a week. Okay.
Yeah.
So we cut the days that weren't, we were open Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday in our pre-pandemic. Like Monday, Tuesday, and Wednesday was costing us money to be open, to keep those shelves stocked. We bake fresh. We're not freezing stuff.
Yeah.
So like in order to have enough stuff for someone to reasonably want to choose from and have that outstanding experience that we talk about, so much waste, so much work goes into just like throwing this party every day. Every single day we are throwing a party with a ton of fresh made food and saying like, great, come on in. Doing that 6 days a week for the range of hours that we were open was not working. So, our labor hours to do all of this, it was just so much time and energy and upkeep of these 3 physical locations, which all need care and stewardship and repairs and all of this stuff. And apparently what they needed was that they needed $500,000 a quarter extra care and maintenance that like wasn't producing anything else. And we had, we were always looking at like the cash on hand at that point. So at that point we had 60 employees on the payroll.
Wow.
About half and half full-time, part-time. Now there are 14 of us. We're all full-time except one. We all work 5 days a week. It takes us 5 days to put on this 3-day party, but it's so much more sustainable. We're able to pay people more. So it's like all these things that I wanted to achieve with growth, with adding product lines and adding locations. Like to me, the reason to do all of that was to be able to pay people more and have opportunities for growth. And then it was so demoralizing when that kept not happening. And it's like, why isn't this working?
Yeah.
And it's now really obvious to me financially looking at this, it's like, oh, because all that extra stuff you signed up to do was just taking resources. It wasn't really adding to the important things.
Yeah. That's really great just hearing that. Because I think there's so many ways to view the pandemic. And like I took a visioning exercise with you in 2019, and it's crazy to think back. Like that was probably like, I think it was in February. It was like just right before everything fell apart. But it's amazing that through those crazy, unpredictable circumstances, you can gain all this insight that you can then use for the rest of your life, And it's like, would you have come to those realizations had that crazy thing not happened, Maybe eventually, but it's just great to hear that you're able to use a crazy circumstance that could have been demoralizing to now make a business that's even a better fit and better profitability.
Yeah, that's, I think, like thinking about the visioning, thinking about money, all of those things. It's so great. One of my dearest friends, Preston, he's in my small business roundtable. And he just has this great habit of always reminding me. He says, it's all tuition. You paid the tuition. So what'd you learn? And I just love that because it really keeps me, whenever I'm wallowing in like, oh, why did I do this thing? Or I can't believe I did this. Or like, oh my God, I feel so stupid that I was working $500,000 more for nothing. And all of this stuff, like he's so great because it's just like, well, you already paid the tuition.
Yeah.
So what'd you learn? What are you going to do with it?
Yeah. There's some like CEO at IBM or something where someone made like a $600,000 loss mistake and they're like, we should fire him. And the CEO said, no, we just
paid the tuition.
Yeah, we just paid like $600,000 in professional development for him. So we invested in him, And
Yeah.
it's like a good way to look at it sometimes.
I was at a conference one time. This really made an impression on me. It was the Small Giants conference, and I was there, just in this zone of also just trying to learn everything I possibly could as a new business person. And the exercise that the facilitator made us do was so visceral to me. And they had us all stand up. Well, at first they had us just I think assess in our small groups, whatever, our most costly mistake as a business person. And what do we estimate that mistake cost? What was the price tag? And then we all stood up and the facilitator started saying numbers. And the thing was once he got to a number higher than your mistake, you sat down.
Oh my God.
And
how many people are in the room?
Maybe about 75 people.
Okay.
And I had just finished building out the kitchen on Broad Avenue. So this was about a decade ago. Most people actually don't realize our kitchen's been there. We've been on Broad for a decade. And I had just finished that. And of course, it had gone over budget and all of this. And I was, just beating myself up with how I had overspent on this, or I'd made some bad mistakes on this project. And just oh, it's all your fault, blah, blah, blah. And here I was in this room, and I was easily one of the first 20 people to sit down.
Wow.
My number was so tiny compared to some of these numbers. And then there were two guys still standing and still standing and still standing as these numbers just got higher and higher. And I've never forgotten it because, it was so helpful for me as a young business person to have a little bit of perspective and context, but also to see we all started standing.
Yeah.
Everybody in the room had no problem being oh, I know mine.
Yeah.
And I feel bad about it and it still and all these things that we beat ourselves up over with the money.
Mm-hmm.
But yeah, realizing, okay, I'm in good company here. And the generosity it took for those last two dudes to just still stand as the rest of us just felt increasingly better about ourselves.
Yeah.
It was a lot of generosity in that room, and it was very, very eye-opening. I've called on that mental image multiple times as I feel oh no, I shouldn't have done this, or I made a mistake here, or I cost the business something here.
That's a really cool exercise.
Yeah.
Yeah. I always feel like conferences changed my life. And I'm if I would have been at that one, I'd been that changed my life.
It changed my life.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I know. Sometimes I'll watch makeover restaurant shows like Bar Rescue or something. And the person will be have the most gross, ugly bar. And it's they've sunk $700,000 into it and they're losing $50,000 per month. And I'm always okay, they're doing that for something that's not even worth saving. It's this terrible place. I feel a little bit better.
Oh my gosh.
Take a deep breath. I don't have that weight on me right now.
Yeah. Well, and I think sometimes too, even just talking about it. So that's the thing. So many of us, I think, struggle privately with this. What is enough and too much? What is too much to sink into something? Because nobody wants to talk about it, we don't really know.
Yeah.
And a lot of us aren't comfortable asking another business person about their financials to even get some context. But the reality is, unless you're looking at publicly traded companies where some things have to be available, most small independent businesses, it's not like we're required to publish stuff everywhere. So people are wondering, what is a fair wage? What is am I below market? Am I not? Am I mismanaging this? And I should be paying my staff more, or I should be paying less for this thing over here, or what should I expect for a healthy profit margin? We don't talk about it, so we don't know.
It's funny thinking about the enough concept, because I think a lot of times with entrepreneurs, when you don't have someone telling you how much money you're making each year, you're sort of oh, well, I don't know. I guess it'd be good to make $1 million or something. And I don't know if you've ever read The 4-Hour Workweek by Tim Ferriss, but he has a line in there where he's talking to a friend who's on a 10-year trajectory in a company to make $1 million. And he's well, what are you going to do when you're making $1 million a year? And he's I don't know, maybe go hike in Thailand. And he's you can hike in Thailand for $400 or something like that, round trip. Yeah. And that there's just these crazy ideas we have for sometimes the things we want. We'll put $1 million price tag on something that really only costs $30,000 a year max. Like, if you actually write down everything you want in life and put a price on it, it's amazing sometimes how manageable that is if you break it down to the like monthly target and the daily target, you know? It's like, oh, I think I can actually do that.
Yeah, or if nothing else, even just try doing it to see if you actually like it.
Yeah.
Like, do I like doing this? Like, oh, maybe not. Maybe I don't like hiking, it turns out.
All right. Well, we have been going for an hour and 30.
Oh my God.
So I could literally talk all day, but I'm going to try to make these last ones like speed round because I don't want to hold you captive all day.
I'll try to then.
All right. So books. What book do you gift the most?
Worth Every Penny.
Never even heard of it.
It's amazing, by Sarah Petty.
Worth Every Penny.
It's the most practical business guide for a small independent business.
Okay, cool. And I was going to recommend, since you liked You Are a Badass, she has a book called You Are a Badass at Making Money.
Yes.
That I've also found very helpful just for mindset stuff.
Okay. I know you said speed. I'm going to add 2 more books real quick, just on the money, since we talked about money so much.
Yeah.
The other one is Financially Fearless by Alexa von Tobel. This is the most the least condescending book about how to run your personal finances that exists. It's wonderful.
Awesome.
And similar to Worth Every Penny, the value is in actually doing the exercises. So this is a workbook. Do the exercises. The second money one has the cheesiest, worst title ever, Friends with Tim Ferriss. I Will Teach You to Be Rich by Ramit Sethi. He's the first person to say it sounds like it's a scam and it's like the cheesiest, worst title of a book. But it is chock full of just like really actionable items you can do. Like, here's how to call your utility company and negotiate. Here's how to get a lower credit card rate. Like all these just basic things
That's awesome.
He's figured out how you do it and says, all right, here's how you do it.
Yeah, and if anybody listening is like scared to crack the spine of one of these books, just know that like once you do it, you'll realize that they don't have as much teeth as you think they do, and they're actually very accessible. And try to put your anxiety aside and try one of these books out, because I know once I started reading money books, I was like sort of got addicted. I'm like, oh, this is actually fun to try to figure out this puzzle.
Yeah,
you know?
And Alexa's book really actually one of the activities she has you do is a visioning activity.
Awesome.
So she utilizes visioning. It's really good to do if you're in a relationship. So, I mean, if you are married or have a business partner, if you're doing it for business. But yeah, my husband and I made ourselves go through her book and do the activities, and it has changed our lives.
Sweet. I'll definitely do that. And I'm glad to not hear something like Dave Ramsey or whatever like that, which nothing wrong with him, but it's nice to hear new ones, you know?
Oh yeah. This is like, no one's going to condescendingly tell you that like, oh, if you just don't buy a latte or an avocado toast, you'll be able to retire by 45.
That was
because that's BS.
That was the subtext of when I mentioned
I
Mr.
went there.
Ramsey. Yeah.
I went there.
Yeah, good. I'm glad you did. Are there any other books outside of those money books, like personal development or business books, that clicked with you?
Yes. Meaningful Work by my friend Sean Askinosi is incredible. If it all resonated with you, hearing my like word vomit about being depressed and anxious and I didn't know what my passion was supposed to be and what the hell am I supposed to do with my life, then try Sean's book, Meaningful Work. It's really, really fantastic. He shares a lot of resources as well as just his personal story, which is amazing. Highly recommend you order one of his chocolate bars with it because you're going to very much want to be munching on one of those chocolate bars. So Askinosi chocolates. The other that I would really recommend for business is, I mentioned the Small Giants Conference earlier. The book Small Giants by Bo Burlingham is what started that conference, and it is really good. It was written just prior to the 2008 recession. So, I mean, a lot of the businesses profiled, like it's not necessarily super timely contemporary business profiles, but it was really eye-opening for me to be able to, kind of get into the weeds with a variety of different types of businesses that all decided to stay small on purpose, whatever small meant for them. So I think the smallest business profiled is one person. The largest is maybe 500 people. But,
okay, cool.
It's not like, oh, how did McDonald's become so successful? It's a little more accessible for I think independence.
I always get frustrated when I'll be like listening to a podcast and they're like, let's take Apple, for example, when they think about products. And it's like,
but let's not.
Yeah. They have the capital of like most of the world's countries combined to work on their stuff. So maybe that's not a good example for solopreneurs.
Right. Like, let's take it down a notch.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, that's great that they use small examples.
Yeah.
I'm excited. I've never read any of these, and I love books in this field. So I'm really excited. Gonna add these to the list. And, I wrote down, you said back when I was depressed and anxious and didn't know what to do with my life, and I said we should write a book called Depressed, Anxious, and Don't Know What to Do with My Life.
Oh, man, that would just be a bestseller.
I would have grabbed that book when I was 26. Okay, we'll try to do the speed round thing. Woo-woo. What's one of the most absurd beliefs you actually believe that you're comfortable sharing?
Okay, I really have trouble thinking about this, but I have to say the most absurd belief, because like they all sound like they make sense to me. So, who knows if it's absurd. But I have been convinced since like the age of 8 that I'm going to experience a massive apocalypse in my lifetime. So I don't want to say that that's already happened. But I will say there have been multiple times this last year, people are like, oh my God, can you believe that this is happening in our lifetime? And I'm like, yep.
So you felt very validated. Mm-hmm. Yeah. My girlfriend and I joked that what if we're all in a simulation and the simulation always ends in an apocalypse? Like your lifeline, everybody's always ends in an apocalypse,
Okay, that could also be a book. Actually, it probably is a book.
Yeah.
That seems like something that would be like really, really amazing and cinematic.
Let's write that as well. Okay, so the next thing would be, what advice would you go back if you were telling someone who's kind of at your starting point? I would say tell yourself, but then people think like, oh, I don't want to change anything I did. It's like, well, not about changing you.
Us literal people get like really into the like, but that would mess up the timeline and who knows the consequences.
Yeah, I asked that to Clark, and Clark was like, question. I wouldn't change anything because I'm here because of those mistakes. I was like, I wasn't asking that.
Right. So unfortunately for you and maybe your listeners, I'm going to kind of do the same thing right now and say a non-answer, which is at this point in my life, the advice that I would give to someone kind of starting out, I would try really hard to refrain from giving advice. It's a huge weakness. That whole like, oh, great, I can fix it for you. I know what's best. Here's all of my wisdom.
Yeah.
And you should follow it. I don't think that would actually be super helpful. So I think I would probably try to just ask some questions instead of offering advice.
Gotcha. Yeah, I think there's a thing that happens a lot in entrepreneurism, which is the one profound truth. The exact opposite of that profound truth is also a profound truth. So you have people be like, you'll see one CEO say like, you have to be really cutthroat and mean and be a bastard. And then you have another one be like, lead with love and like, we care about our people. And they're both saying that those are the most important things. And they're both super successful. And you can probably find a book that's like, start with why, start with where, start with how. Like, there's almost always advice that can contradict other advice.
Yes.
So I respect your answer.
Thank you.
What trait do you recognize repeatedly in quote unquote successful people in life and not in others? Major air quotes on successful.
Major air quotes on successful. Well, I think successful people do the work. Whatever you're successful in. So you can even take away the air quotes because it just depends on your definition of success. Yeah. But when I am successful at stuff, it's because I actually did the work and stopped stalling or stopped avoiding or whatever. And when I'm not successful, usually I can follow that thread back and be like, well, you didn't do the work.
Yeah. It's like they say there are problems of sloth and there are problems of action, and you want to have all problems of action and not problems of sloth.
Right.
So like, what else was it going to... Oh, yeah. Thoreau said, do the thing and you will have the power.
Yeah.
Everything
it takes us
works.
back to commit.
Yeah.
It's like doing the work is committing. Like committing is doing the work.
Yeah.
So that seems to be the difference on success or failure, whatever your definition of those is.
Yeah. So do something, y'all, if you're listening. Just do it. You know what you need to do. Yeah. Stop avoiding it. Do it. To close, what are you excited about right now?
I'm so excited about so many things right now. Oh my gosh. Okay. I'm really excited about my team. I love working with these people so much every day. And I feel like this has been really exciting for me to kind of do a do-over on my business a little bit and have a fresh beginning in a mature brand. You know, we've been around the block a few times, learned some hard lessons. I've learned some hard lessons, but I'm really enjoying doing it. Feels like we're a startup again, but with all of the lessons learned from the past 13 years. And this time around, it also feels like, yes, I'm the one in charge, and yes, it's ultimately my responsibility, but I'm working with a team of people that are also really knowledgeable and skilled. And it has been very exciting to me to feel like we're building something. And I've really got a team in a way that, you know, first starting out, it didn't necessarily always feel that way.
Yeah.
I felt like I had to do everything myself. And this feels really amazing. So it's like, yeah, I'm excited about classes. I'm excited about the truck. I'm excited about the new space. I'm excited about all of that stuff. But yeah, I think at the core of that, I'm excited about doing all of this with the people that I'm doing it with and for the people that we're doing it for.
Sweet. That's something to be excited about. All right. And where can people find you if you want to be found?
2497 Broad Avenue.
Memphis, Tennessee.
Memphis, Tennessee.
All right. Any socials or anything like that?
Oh, yeah. That seems like an obvious part of the answer that I just completely skipped over.
Yes, people often give their addresses.
I'm so literal. I'm like, yep, here's where we are. Come when we're open.
Yes.
Yeah, you can also find us at muddiesbakeshop.com and on Instagram at Muddy's Bake Shop, Facebook also at Muddy's Bake Shop, and that's it. We don't Twitter, we don't TikTok, we don't do other stuff.
Cool. All right. Well, thank you so much, Kat. I have gained a lot of insights and feel great after talking to you as a fellow entrepreneur. So thank you for sharing all your experience and insight, because I know I got a lot out of this. So I hope the listeners did too. Thanks for sharing, being vulnerable, and showing up.
Thanks for having me. I do not envy you attempting to edit this because I talked a lot.
Hey, we went for an hour and 42 minutes, and I think I can only probably shave about 10 minutes out of there, and it's probably going to be me. So,
ooh, so gang, like, hope you prepared a snack.
Buckle up.
Yeah.
All right. Thank you, Kat.
Thank you.
And thank you all for listening. If you enjoyed the show, the best thing you can do to support it is to tell a friend about it. Podcasts spread through word of mouth, y'all. The next best thing is to follow us on Apple Podcasts. You say follow now, not subscribe. They just changed it up, and that helps with the algorithms. And last but not least, if you want to leave a review, I'd love to hear what you think about the show. So please do that on Apple as well. And don't forget to subscribe to my Hit the Ground Running newsletter. I send it out every Monday, and it features the most helpful idea I could find this week and a success tip from my latest podcast guest. So it helps you hit the ground running every Monday. Also, check out our Patreon at patreon.com/ideally. I have bonus episodes, monthly challenges, and we're going to do some live hangouts and more in there. But hey, if you made it this far, I love you, and I will see you next week. Can you just say a couple things?
Juan dat April with the shore is sota. The drought of March hath persed to the rota.
Awesome. What was that?
The prologue to the Canterbury Tales.
Ah, I have not read the
Shout
Canterbury.
out St. Mary's.
I was like, what language is that?
Old English.